The KwaZulu-Natal Education Department says the 6.3 billion rand budget cut imposed on the department will severely affect pupils, teachers and the buildings that need to be renovated in schools. South Africa's Democratic Teachers Union members have also staged a picket urging Treasury to relook the budget cut as KZN is short of 2,000 teachers. For more on this, I'm joined by the Provincial Education MEC, Kwazi Mshengu. Mr. Mshengu, thank you so much for your time. Let's talk about at a local level, like grassroots. Talk to us about how this is going to impact the teachers, the learners, and these buildings that you say need to be renovated.
Greetings to you and to the viewers of the newsroom. Well, the impact is really dire and severe, as we have seen in the past days, where now the department is unable to fill the vacant posts that are necessary across the province in terms of educators. There are 2,000 posts that we are unable to fill because we don't have money resulting from the budget cuts. But also there are other attendant challenges that come with these budget cuts. We have been advised by the Provincial Treasury that in addition to the 2,000 posts that we are unable to fill, we now need to cut another 2,000 from the existing staff, which will mean that cumulatively we'll have about over 4,000 posts that are necessary for quality education in the province, which cannot be filled. But it also means basically we are now starting to talk the language of retrenchment, because the additional 2,000 are existing posts that are filled, but Treasury says we need to reduce the headcount. There are also a number of infrastructure projects that we wanted to roll out, including renovations of schools that were destroyed through vandalism, but also by inclement weather conditions. There are also new schools that we wanted to build. There's a massive ICT infrastructure that we wanted to roll out in our schools, which we now cannot because we are now 6.3 billion less, which makes things very, very dire for the department. I can tell that I can reveal that indeed quality teaching and learning has been severely affected in the province. There are schools where we also acknowledge that there is no effective teaching and learning, precisely because we can't fill the posts that are necessary, because without a teacher in class, basically there is no education.
Let's talk about what the Treasury is attributing these budget cuts to.
Well, they're saying it's a national problem. I'm sure we all know that government is going through austerity measures, and it's part of those austerity measures that we had to suffer these budget cuts. But I must also indicate that we did object as a Department of Education in KZN, and we felt that we should have been protected like other departments such as Gauteng, where there were no budget cuts effected against the Department of Education, because education remains the apex priority of government. And if you tamper with a teacher in class, really you are not worthy to be called Department of Education, because there will be no education. Our schools without teachers will be turned into basically residences that keep learners away from home until they are back home in the afternoon, but without any skills development, without them gaining necessary competencies, and there will really be no teaching and learning at all. That is why we are saying everything that can be done should be done, but don't disrupt the teaching and learning at a classroom level, because a teacher is a constant phenomenon at a classroom level. Without him or her, then there will be no teaching and learning, as we said.
How are you going to navigate this, especially because it's putting you in a very difficult position with the unions, who, through SATU also, the union has staged a picket for its members, and you are now having to balance what Treasury is saying. How do you foresee yourselves as the department here navigating this?
We've raised the matters with all relevant departments, which is the Provincial Treasury, the National Department of Education. We have raised the matter with also the Premier of the province, who have undertaken that is going to lead a delegation to the National Treasury to plead our case, because we have laid the consequences of these budget cuts to bear to say we can't hide that there's effective teaching and learning when there are no teachers in classroom. We can't continue to promise that we're going to rebuild schools or renovate schools, build new schools, roll out IC infrastructure and other things when actually there is no money to do so. And we have decided even to say it to public so that there are no unreasonable expectations that certain things can be done when we know exactly that they cannot be done. In fact, the picture that has been given to us by the Provincial Treasury is quite gloomy because in their correspondence, they have told us that in the next financial year, which is 2022-2023, they are going to effect further cuts of about 9 billion. Now, it is clear that in the next coming years, the situation, unless something drastic is done, is going to be very bad. And in our view, is that the government, both provincial and national, must do everything to protect the education space because that's where we build families, that's where we build communities, that's where we build a nation. There can't be any nation that is successful and thriving with a population that is not educated.
What will this mean for the eradication of things like pit latrines and also ensuring that the school feeding scheme program is also still running?
With regard to pit latrines, obviously it will be affected. While there is a grant that is given to us by national budget, that grant is not sufficient, and we have always topped it up with some funding from the equitable share, which now we can't do. So we're going to solely rely on the grant funding from national, which is really not sufficient. And therefore, the pace of eradication of pit latrines in the province will be affected. Our anticipation was that by the end of next year, we should have eradicated all pit latrines in the province. But with the situation we are facing, we don't think that we're going to meet that target, as I said, unless something drastic is done. But with regard to NSNP, again, that is a grant funding which is not affected by budget cuts. So we're not expecting disruption insofar as the NSNP is concerned.
Let's talk about the COVID-19 cases. We're seeing an uptake, in fact, an increase on COVID cases in the province. And this, some say that can be attributed to the recent unrest that we saw in that province as well as in Gauteng. How concerned are you as the education department then when you're seeing cases go up in this manner?
We're very much concerned with the rising infections in the province of KwaZulu-Natal. And as you know that schools are actually a reflection of our communities. So as infection rise in communities, that will also be seen at a schooling level. We have seen a rising number of infections affecting learners in the main this time around. There are some also educators who are also affected. And that continues to disrupt teaching and learning because from time to time, a school will have to be closed for a day or two in order for it to be decontaminated. The infected learners and their contact persons will lose time because they will have to go and isolate. So it is quite disruptive. But what we don't agree with is a view by certain members in our communities to say we must close schools, because that first and foremost give an impression that infections are only happening in schools, when in our view they happen at home level, they happen in the streets, because when these learners are not in schools, we don't have control over them. But what we see is most of them will be on the streets without following the proper regulations or safety measures, as it were. So it's something that the Department of Education will have to play its role in ensuring that schools are safe, which we are doing. Parents must also play their role to ensure that learners are always safe when they're home or when they're playing on the streets, so that we curb the rise of infections at all levels.
Don't you think, though, that some of them might have a point, as they say, maybe some of the teachers may be put at risk here? Do you envision a situation where maybe infections could be so out of control that you might need to reconsider that position?
Obviously, we will be advised by the health experts as to when it is appropriate to close all schools in the province or even in the country, as it has been happening in the past. It was not just an overnight decision by Department of Education. We get advice by the Department of Health and leading experts as to say when to close and when to open. But we also do indicate that the impact is too severe when learners are not in schools. You will have seen that in the country it has been reported that over 500,000 learners have dropped out of school because of the inconsistencies in terms of attendance resulting from COVID-19. And KZN will account for almost a third of that who have dropped out. We have seen a number of rising social ills affecting our learners. Just yesterday, I think there was a report that in Gauteng alone, there were about 23,000 learners who have reported to be pregnant. So there is a combination of negative factors that affect our learners, the issues of learning gaps, that will be impactful to the learners even in more years to come from now. Those are the things that we try to avoid when we keep our schools closed, because it's not just about closing the schools, saving lives. It's about saving lives, but also saving the future of these learners, because if they're at home, clearly there is no future that can be guaranteed.
And are you going to be engaging SARTU on some of the concerns that they've raised in order to try and allay some of the fears? Because from what you're telling us, you're finding yourself in a tight corner here.
We are in constant engagement with SARTU. We have been engaging them even before they staged the picket yesterday. In fact, if you look into their memorandum, they are quite also clear that this is not a fault of Department of Education. So that is why they took the memorandum to the Premier, because it's a government matter now that must be resolved at that level. So our engagement with SARTU, with all other unions, UNATU, NAPTOSA, and all other relevant stakeholders, including the associations of school governing bodies, we continue with those engagements to try and see how do we allay fears, how then we find better solutions in the circumstances we are facing.
All right, that's MEC Kwazi Mshengu there. Thank you so much for your time, as you really paint a picture of just how dire this situation is. You know, as you try then to navigate these waters of budget cuts that are also then resulting in the province having a shortage of teachers, and that in fact is having a negative impact on the learners themselves in class. And we wait then to see if Treasury will accede to some of the requests of the department in order to try then and find common ground here. That's Kwazi Mshengu there, who's the MEC for Education in KwaZulu-Natal.